Hey everyone, welcome back. So in this video, we're going to continue where we left off as usual, and I believe now is the time we're going to start setting up our gameplay screen. Now, before we do this, however, I want to make a few aesthetic additions to our main menu screen before we head in that direction. Just some minor actions like we've added before, such as to our splash screen like you've seen. Um, we're also going to add a listener, a click listener, to our play button to be able to transition into this new play screen. And yeah, that's something I've just added. It's just like you saw before when I did with the main menu screen, so you don't have to see me type out all this unnecessary code over again. Just kind of the bare minimum, the regular methods that come along with implementing the screen class and setting up a stage and whatnot. And I believe we should first go into our application class and get that all established so we can use it later. So that's going to be play screen, and we'll just call that play screen, simple name. And then we'll also go down here real quick. It's going to be play screen equals new play screen. Okay. Now we can go to our dispose method and make sure to dispose of that screen, and I believe that's all we need to do in our application class, so we can just close that. And coming back to our main menu screen, like I said, I wanted to add some aesthetic options to this, and or looks to our buttons as they enter, so it doesn't just look like they spontaneously appear in the screen right after the splash screen. And I pre-wrote some just to make sure you guys don't have to bear with struggling getting things to align right and whatnot. So all we're going to do is, actually let's start with the play button. So button play, as you've seen before, go to add action, and we're going to want to do a sequence and set the alpha to 0. So we're just going to have them do a basic kind of fade in. There's going to be some moderately short animations going on here. A kind of good thing to do just to make your game feel like it's moving at a steady pace. You want to understand how fast, or you want to pay attention to how fast your animations are going and how they feel when the player is entering the game, so the player can still navigate your game without being slowed down by waiting for animations to finish their transitions and whatnot. And while you're able to still do this click listener action and whatnot while it's doing its animation, it doesn't feel natural, and so you want to make sure your game is easily accessible into every screen right off the bat. So you don't want those animations to really last more than a second or 2 seconds, depending on what you're moving, especially buttons and whatnot on some of your smaller games. So just keep that in mind. Animations are nice, but don't overdo it. They can be fun and look pretty at first, but it can really bog down the player experience if you use too many of them. So we're just going to do some simple fade in, fade out transitions, and that's about it on our actors that we're going to be having. So like I said, we're going to add some fade in to this button play and button exit, and that's just going to be the sequence, and we're going to have a parallel after that. That's going to be fade in 0.5f, and then we're also going to move that down by 0 on the x and -20. So it'll just kind of slide down a little bit as if it's fading down into the screen. Give it a little bit of a 2.5D effect. And we're also going to interpolate that by POW5 out. And that'll give it a smooth transition as it hits its final destination. So we're going to just take this same action and apply it to our button exit. So easy enough, just kind of keeping some symmetry going on there and consistency. And so with that, we should probably check it out, see, just so you guys can see what's going on there. I'm sure you're all familiar with actions enough by now, and so yeah, that looked pretty smooth. So I think I'm going to also set something real quick. One thing I feel I should mention that I forgot to mention before when we were doing some code hardening is this method right here. I should have removed that before this video, but in the show method, I'm gonna just comment this out right now, and this will kind of give you some insight into how the show and how the hide method works and whatnot. Um, and we're going to take this click listener and we're going to set it onto the button play, but we're going to make a few changes real quick. It's going to change to the main menu screen again, so it'll be like as if the main menu screen just got loaded back into again from some other screen, as if you're, let's say you just played a game and you're going back to the main menu screen and you want the buttons to do their fade in again to kind of give that nice, okay, we're entering back in. It's not just super immediate. So app.setScreen, and that's going to be main menu screen. Oh, whoops. So app.main menu screen. Okay, perfect. So now when we click the play button, the application will set the screen to this same screen again, and it will go through the hide method and go back through the show method again as if it wasn't already set. So we'll be able to see how this stage.clear is going to help us kind of refresh our screen, because we do add these buttons again each time, so it's good to just clear out all the actors on our screen. So I'm going to click the play button, and you're going to note, do you see how it kind of another set of buttons fades in? We don't really want that. That's kind of bad. So this will help us clear out all the actors being these text buttons we created, because we do add them to the stage every time. So just kind of pay attention to when you're adding these actors in and whatnot. That way you don't get any kind of effect like that. And if you want in the stage.show, like especially for your main menu and whatnot, just kind of those menus, you want to either re-add or just not add them again. You could do init buttons up here if your main menu screen is never destroyed or disposed of. So it all kind of depends on how you're framing your game. So now that we have the stage.clear in there again, when we press play, you'll notice the effect will kind of make the buttons come in again without leaving those old instances of them in there, still attached to the stage that is in our main menu screen. So if one thing to note though is if we move this.stage equals new stage into our show method, then we wouldn't have to do that, but because we're kind of maintaining that stage object, we're just clearing it out and moving on from there. So now that we have some decent enough animations, I guess, to add some polish to our game, we can finally move in to the play screen. And this is where our slides game is really going to pick up, and we're going to get into some more general just Java logic, not so much LibGDX stuff, but there will be some more tricky action motions involved. But overall, it's just going to rely on how well you know object-oriented design and whatnot. So we can get out of, actually, you know what? We should probably set this to play screen now that we have a play screen. And that's what our button play action is going to be. So our main menu screen is now finalized for now, unless we want to add some other stuff later. But we can get out of the splash screen, and now we're in the play screen, and there's a few things we want to set up first. First and foremost, we need to get a skin again, because I'm going to be using text buttons for the grid that we'll be using, and that'll just kind of make it easier on us, because we're going to extend the text button object to make our own kind of actor with a special property to be able to figure out when our board has been solved and whatnot. So you guys will see that in just a second. But let's get some of these initial variables set up. So we do need a skin for those buttons, which is why I brought all that previous stuff up just a second ago. And then we're also going to want to get our game grid. So this is going to include that like a board size. So that's going to be an int board size. We're just going to set that to 4 for now. We might be able to set it to 3 or 5 later on, but at the moment we're going to start with a basic number 15 slider game. So after that we're going to want to have an int for the whole x and whole y, and the reason I have that is because as you know, with a slide 15 puzzle, there is there's an element missing. There's not a 16th element, so there's kind of a hole in the board, and so we'll kind of need to keep track of that. That'll help us be able to maneuver our buttons around our grid and whatnot, and be able to slide them every which way. And then we also want to have a back button to go back into our main menu. So these are just text buttons, or you know what, we could call them just nav buttons in the comments. So private text button back. Okay, simple enough. So once we have that, we can go down here into our show method, and we're going to want to do stage.clear. Just like I said, going in and out of the play screen, we'll want to clear them out. And then we want to do, we want to load that skin back in, and because we do that in main menu screen, we can just pull that code back and utilize the same kind of resources, because we're just going to be using the same skin, so no reason to change any of that. And I know what you're saying, copying code. We could just have this in our main application, and that's true. I honestly could put that there, but for the sake of maybe using a separate skin class or something, I just threw this here. So after that, we're going to want to initialize our grid and initialize our back button. So first, we're going to initialize our navigation button. We'll just call that init navigation buttons. Private void init navigation buttons. Okay. And then we're also going to want a method called init grid. Okay. And so just to make a note here, initialize the game grid, and okay, so now that we have those methods kind of there, we also forgot a few things in the update method and the render method, so that we need our stage.act delta, and then we also need our stage.draw. Okay, that way it'll be able to draw and continue the actions we apply to our actors. And now I'm going to move on to the part, you're wondering where my game grid is, I'm sure, at this point, and I'm going to set that in an actors package, and I'm going to create a new class, and we're going to call this slide button. And this is going to extend the text button class, public slide button. Okay, and we're going to want to import that so we can get the right super constructor. So super, and I believe that takes 3 arguments. So you have the string text for the button, the skin it's going to get, and import that. And then you're also going to have a string for the style that the button is going to have. And the reason I'm making this extra text button class is because I want to be able to keep track of what number the button is containing, because for some reason I got some strange errors anytime I tried to do string comparisons on the text buttons, and it's actually heavier to do all those string comparisons every time you want to check the board has been solved. So I'm just going to have this int ID, and this will just kind of be like a wrapper class, and so we'll have a private int ID, and then we're going to have a get method, public int get ID, return ID. Oh, there we go. Okay, and Then we want to call the super constructor skin and style. Perfect. And then this.id equals id. Okay, so this method, or this class is all taken care of. So now we have a specialized text button that has some member data that I can actually observe and use to check if the game is solved and whatnot. So we can now go back into our play screen and start setting up our grid. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a 2D array, so private slide button. That's going to be a 2D array. Import that, and this is going to be button grid. Okay, and so now that we have those, we can come down here, and don't forget we also need to dispose of stuff. Stage.dispose, and I believe that's all we need to dispose of. Yeah, so that's all we need. So we can go here and create our back button. So button back equals new text button, and that's going to say back skin, and we'll just use the default theme. Okay, and button back dot set position, and we're just going to set that in the top left corner, so 20, and then I think app.camera.viewport height minus, let's say 70, or you know what, 60 should be fine. Button back dot set size, and we're going to set this to be, we might have to check this one, so I'm just going to set it to 100 by 50. You know what, that should just be 70 then. I'll give it a 20 by 20 buffer on the corners. And I think that's all we need. Oh, you know what, we actually do want to give it an action so it can go back to the main menu. So I'll just, again, I'm sorry, I'm pretty lazy about this. Don't like typing all that out. But button back dot set the click listener, and we're going to set that to go back to the main menu screen. Okay, perfect. And then once you've initialized your button, you just want to add it to the stage. So stage.add actor button back. Okay. So just to check this real quick, why don't we load our game up just to see if our back button is all working accordingly. Okay, loads up, play button, yep, that looks a lot nicer, play, and there's our back button. We'll click it one more time, and that is a good buffer. I'm glad to see that was a decent amount of space, especially around the text back, and yeah, that looks great. So now we can continue on. All we're going to get through today, I believe, is just initializing our grid and getting the hole in. So it's not going to be shuffled yet. It's not going to have actions to be able to click, so you can try and solve the game yet. But we will be getting to a point. I believe the next video we will kind of be finishing that off, so you actually have a playable game. And that's pretty much going to be the end of this tutorial. I feel like I might be wanting to work on a Pong demo, utilizing Scene2D again, just to be give you guys a little bit more with the actors and controlling with actual keyboard input. But for now, I think this is a good basic approach. So getting into the grid, we have this new slide button 2D array, and we're going to want to come down here, and the whole X is going to be at entry 3, and the whole Y is going to be at entry 3, and that's because it's a 4x4 grid, and because arrays work starting at a 0 index, the 3 will be the bottom right corner. So you'll see where that ends up in just a second. But soon we'll want to randomize these, kind of give some challenge by mixing up our grid and also randomizing where the hole is and whatnot. So it will be different every time you play and add that versatility to your game. So we want to initialize that slide array or that grid array, and so we do button grid equals new slide button 2D array, and we have that board size variable. Okay, and then we're going to want to loop through every entry, and if you guys know how to navigate through 2D arrays, I'm sure this will look moderately familiar. For int j equals 0, j is less than board size, j plus plus. So in this case, I is going to be our row, and j is going to be our column of our grid. So going through it, we're going to have button grid I j equals new slide button. We're going to want to pass it the starting number that it's going to get. So because we're not shuffling the grid yet, this is going to be kind of different than the outcome product, but this is just so we can get a visual representation of what the numbers and pieces will look like on our screen and with the buttons and whatnot. So in order to get it to count up in a 2D array, you can just do j plus 1 plus I times board size, and that's gonna, I think I need to make that like a string or something, and then you're gonna pass it skin, and then I might just make a local variable and call that id equals j plus 1 plus I times board size, because I am going to be typing that out again. So id, and then it's going to be default again because we are working with text buttons and it needs a skin, and just pass it ID because that's what our slide button takes. If you remember, we have this specialized ID. So that's how you create that new slide button actor text button. Then we'll move on to setting the position of each of these buttons, and that's going to be ij dot set. Oh, spelled it wrong. Button gird. Okay. Set position, and this one I kind of just calculated it out to be something interesting. I'm not sure how effective it actually is, so bear with me. Viewport width divided by 7, and I'm going to contain that in parentheses and multiply that by 2, and then I'm going to add 51 times j for every column. It'll move over by 51 units or pixels. So this is the more important part. This is just kind of where everything starts. And then we'll kind of do the same thing over here. App.camera viewport height, and we're going to divide that by 5, multiply it by 3, and then kind of the same thing like we saw, but multiply that times I, and just so you guys can see that a little bit better. So this is like the starting location, so the top left corner, and oh, I'm sorry, this would actually be minus because we want it to be numbered down, so it'll be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so you guys will see that in just a second. I'm going to bring that down because that is wrapping a little bit far out there. So now we want to set the size of the button, and we're almost there. We're really close, guys. So set size, and that's going to be 50, 50, and the reason I'm setting these buttons to size 50 is because it, from what I can tell, it was a reasonable size, like a viewing size, and it's kind of nice to click them. And that's also the reason why we set this to 51, so there'll be some space in between the buttons when it iterates through this for loop. So now that we have that, before we add any fancy effects to the buttons entering the screen, we want to add them to the stage. So stage.add actor, and that's going to be button grid I j. Okay, so now that that's all taken care of and everything, we'll want to do this real quick. So we initialize the buttons, but if I equals whole y and j equals whole X. Oh, this should be so let me think of the logic here. If I does not equal whole y and j does not equal whole x, I think that should be, oh shoot, how did I write that before? Okay, so y does not equal whole x. Okay, well, we'll just leave the whole out for now, so we'll just check that in a second. Running it, and so we can see those buttons load up. So we go to the play main menu, go to play, and look at that. We got a nice grid of clickable buttons, and they're all counting in the order we want them to. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. So like I said, there's normally a hole missing, and that's what I was going to account for in just a bit. But yeah, now we got a centered grid, and soon we'll be adding actions to these to be able to slide them around, and we'll also have a randomized hole, and all the numbers will be randomized. And there's going to be some like text up here that'll inform the user of whether or not they tried clicking an invalid move, and it'll also display whether or not they've solved the grid. So we can go back real quick and go in here, and as you notice, it's that kind of same thing happening where, you know, the game grid kind of just appears. So we don't really want that to happen. We want a little bit of visual fancification. So we're gonna add some pretty special effects here. One that I just kind of threw together for the buttons is actually, it turned out pretty nice. So button grid I j dot add action, and I believe we'll have to add, yeah, so we need that, the static import for the actions. Don't forget to add that. Go back to the play screen here. There we go. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, there we go. And then we can come back down here to the bottom of our play screen and start adding our actions. So the one I came up with kind of has all the buttons flow in a nice way in order. And a weird effect happens with the alpha. It adds this like kind of shimmer to the button as it enters the screen. So you guys will see that in just a sec. So delay is going to be button, actually, you know what, I have this ID up here, so I can just use ID divided by 20f. This does have to be float for delay because we use ID as an integer. Delay, if you divide it by 20, it'll do integer division, and you'll get a rounding inaccuracy with that. So add the float in there, and you'll get a nicer delay timer. And then we want to do a, well, that's not where I wanted that to go. So parallel, and in that parallel is going to be a fade in by 0.5f. And then we're also going to have a move by, similar to our main menu. Again, trying to keep a consistency but not overdoing it. Negative 10, 0.25f, and then interpolation. We want the POW5 out again. So I'm going to move that down. And I think, I believe that was all I had. So let's check that out one more time. The reason I used ID divided by 20 in the delay is so each button will cascade in one at a time, and it kind of adds a little bit of a nice grid setup effect. So here we go. And so you saw at the end there had that kind of nice little shimmer to it. So you can adjust that delay if you want, or you can use an entirely different animation. I guess I could have clicked back there, but so just adding a little bit of effect to your game will kind of give it that nice little polish that most people look for. Kind of makes it easier on the eyes, so things don't change instantaneously. It's kind of harder for people to react to that. Maybe turning it to 15 will even be a little bit faster. Yeah, so there we go. And if you want, you can add something to the back button, but because your eyes are kind of focused on the main grid, I actually wouldn't worry about the back button too much. So we might do a fade out, but I'm not too worried about that, as the play and exit buttons fade in anyway. So with that, I think I'm just going to hold off before adding any of the logic for the whole X and whole Y, because we are going to start getting a little bit tricky with some of the solving logic, allowing these buttons, giving them actions to move around in very special ways, and being able to solve the grid also is going to be introduced in the next video. So with that, hope you guys enjoyed what we got going so far, and I hope to see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.